Postmodernism is a broad, cultural, intellectual movement that arose in the late 20th century. It challenged assumptions of modernism, such as reason, progress, and universal truths. It also gave rise to modern art and modern architecture, arguing that universal beauty standards don't exist. Due to postmodernism, we have beautiful masterpieces such as Untitled, and you guessed it, Untitled. It started after the Second World War, because reason and the Enlightenment had led us into two catastrophic wars and totalitarian regimes. As reason and the Enlightenment led us to this, maybe it's not valid. It tried to challenge ideas of beauty, philosophy, and science, and tried to claim that these things are actually subjective and not objective truths. The idea stems back to Friedrich Nietzsche, who is quoted as saying, "There are no facts, only interpretations." This quote is often taken to mean that reality is unknowable, but Nietzsche was a bit more nuanced than this. He wasn't denying that reality exists, he was simply questioning whether humans can actually perceive reality as it is through language, perception, and science. While Nietzsche wasn't a postmodernist himself, his ideas about objective truth influenced postmodernist thinkers such as Michel Foucault and Jacques Derrida. These writers, like many philosophers, write in a style that's quite hard to understand. For example, here's an excerpt from Of Grammatology by Derrida. "The science of writing should therefore look for its objects at the roots of scientificity. The history of writing should turn back toward the origins of historicity, a science of the possibility of science, a science of science, which would no longer have the form of logic but that of grammatics. A history of the possibility of history, which would no longer be an archaeology, a philosophy of history, or a history of philosophy. The positive and the classical sciences of writing are obliged to repress this sort of question. Up to a certain point, such repression is even necessary to the progress of positive investigation. Beside the fact that it would still be held with the philosophizing logic, the ontophenomenological question of essence, that is to say, of the origin of writing, could by itself only paralyze or sterilize the typological or historical research of facts." In simpler terms, Derrida is basically arguing that language is a subjective thing that changes over time, so any scientific knowledge is not fully stable and is not objective. So let's analyze all the postmodernist claims as it refers to philosophy and science in this video. I will admit some bias here. I believe in objective truth, and I don't believe that everything is subjective. However, I will look at their claims empirically and try to be as impartial as possible. This is a philosophy channel, and all I care about is reason and evidence. If they make a valid argument, I will acknowledge it. Chapter 1. Philosophy is a Western idea. The basic postmodernist argument against philosophy is this. Philosophy is a Western imposition that marginalizes non-European forms of thought. For example, quotes like this. "There is no universal philosophy. There is only Western philosophy, posing as universal." Paraphrased from The Darker Side of Western Modernity, Walter Mignolo. So Western philosophy grew out of Europe, and Europe was colonial to the rest of the world. There are many other methodologies and ways of thinking about the world, and these are diminished by the West. So from what I see, postmodernists don't generally seem to define terms very, very often. So the first law of logic is the law of identity. Words have lots of meanings, and you have to specify which one you're referring to or what your definition of a word is that you're using. If you don't, then it can be very unclear, and there can be equivocation fallacies where you mix definitions and you change definitions mid-argument. You have to specify definitions. At its core, philosophy is simply not killing or punishing people who disagree with you, seeking truth through curiosity and evidence, changing beliefs when presented with better arguments. These aren't uniquely Western values, they are just good values. Postmodernists generally don't define terms that they use, because if they did, their argument would sound absurd. Not killing people that disagree with you is a Western idea that perpetuates colonialism. Being curious and seeking truth diminishes other non-Western ideas of thought. This is why they don't define terms, because it removes the smoke and mirrors. Either way, let's look at the history of philosophy to see if any of these claims hold any truth. Western philosophy originated in ancient Greece, However, the Greeks got a lot of ideas about mathematics, metaphysics, medicine, architecture, astronomy from Egypt, Mesopotamia, and Persia. This alone challenges the narrative that these things are solely Western ideas. But let's keep going. Ancient Greece was in quite a unique situation in ancient times. It was like a perfect storm that allowed the ideas of philosophy to develop. Greece was comprised of many small city-states and not one large state. This allowed competition, and it also meant that there wasn't as much concentrated power to enforce one religious worldview. Combine that with having a culture of curiosity and debate in courts and assemblies, and this was the perfect place for philosophy to develop. So philosophy developed in Greece. Ideas like democracy, formalized logic, epistemology, and the Socratic method, among other things. This then spread to Rome, and as Rome had the most formidable military force at the time, it was spread throughout Europe through the Roman Empire. Yes, philosophical ideas were carried by colonial expansion, but so were countless technologies, languages, and foods. That doesn't discredit them. Of course, I think colonialism is bad. I mean, my country was attacked by the Romans. I don't see many postmodernists bringing this point up. Britain itself was a victim of colonialism. But just because something is spread through an immoral way doesn't mean that thing is invalid. If someone takes over my country and teaches me that 2 plus 2 is 4, does that mean that 2 plus 2 isn't 4 because they were colonizers? No, this is a fallacy. This is a type of ad hominem or genetic fallacy. Their ideas are incorrect because Romans were colonizers. This is not valid. The arguments of Western philosophy need to be directly challenged. You can't challenge the source. So modern science and philosophy developed from there, after quite a lot of struggle against church power in the Middle Ages. In postmodernism, Christianity and philosophy and science are lumped together as Western colonial tools of oppression. This is an oversimplification because they are completely different. The Catholic Church suppressed scientific discovery in the Middle Ages, and only during the Enlightenment did science and philosophy win the intellectual battle. Postmodernists decry other cultures being suppressed, but say nothing about science being suppressed by Christianity in the Middle Ages. So after the Enlightenment, many empires spread across the world, from Europe. The British Empire, the French Empire, the Spanish Empire. Again, I'm not defending colonialism. Taking people's lands and forcing them under your rule is wrong. However, you have to actually contend with the arguments in philosophy. You can't just say, people from Europe were colonialists and took land unjustly. They helped develop science and philosophy, therefore science and philosophy are invalid. This is simply a genetic fallacy or ad hominem. To show how ridiculous this argument is, here's a simpler version. People from Europe were colonialists and took land unjustly. They said 2 plus 2 equals 4. Therefore 2 plus 2 isn't 4. Chapter 2. Logic is a Western construct. Here is the postmodernist claim about logic. Logic is a Western construct used to dominate, exclude, and silence other ways of thinking. Again, there is no definition here. What is logic? I would define it as arguing and thinking to reach a conclusion or to convince others. So by this definition, isn't this sentence using logic? If you argue to change someone's mind, then you are using logic. How can you use logic to disprove logic? And if logic is a way for Western colonialism to dominate others, then aren't they guilty of that too? In philosophy, we call this a performative contradiction. This is where your actions contradict what you're saying. But I'm not just going to stop here. In a previous video, I argued that all animals that have senses show signs of the 3 laws of logic. You can watch my video on the 3 laws of logic if you want more detail. Here's a quick summary. The law of identity, A is A and not anything else. A book is a book, a tree is a tree. The law of non-contradiction, A cannot exist and not exist at the same time. And law of excluded middle, objective claims are either true or false. So when foxes look for food, they don't look for horses, they don't look for people, they look for chickens or rabbits or whatever their food is. If they see a chicken, they can't believe it's both a horse and a chicken at the same time. So in order for animals to survive, they have to be able to identify food from not food, danger from not danger, and so on. Animals also can't consistently survive if they think something is food and not food at the same time, and they have to believe that these claims are true or false. The claim that a chicken is food or not is either true or false. So how is logic a Western and colonial idea if animals that have senses all demonstrate the three laws of logic? Maybe these animals have internalized Western colonial propaganda. To preempt a straw man, I'm not claiming that animals have the same cognitive abilities and logical power as humans. I'm simply saying that all animals that have senses show the signs of the three laws of logic. Chapter 3. There is no objective truth. The claim is, there are no objective truths, only narratives shaped by language, power, and culture. So all of these arguments seem to be performative contradictions. So to this argument I can simply ask, is it objectively true that there are no objective truths? You literally can't claim this without contradicting yourself. If the claim itself is true, then at least one thing is true and the argument defeats itself. It's like me saying, language is meaningless. If your claim isn't objective, then it's just your opinion, and I can just ignore it. Also, if there is no objective truth, then I like ice cream and I am alive are the same statement. They are both opinions and literally can't be argued. To even have a debate, we need objective things. If you want to debate subjective claims, then you need objective facts to compare against. For example, Lionel Messi is the best player of all time because he has won the most championships. We can contest this because it uses an objective standard, the amount of championships. We can see if that claim is true or false, and then see if the belief is justified based on that objective standard. If someone says, Lionel Messi is the best player because I like him the most, then you can't debate this in philosophy. If there are no objective claims, and everything is subjective, there is literally no way to debate anything in philosophy anymore. If a philosopher argues there is no objective truth, then it is like a mathematician arguing against the validity of arithmetic. Math is impossible without arithmetic, and philosophy is impossible without objective and subjective categories. It makes debate impossible. But let's look at the claims about language, because maybe they have an argument there. So they claim that language is objective, we use language to interpret the world, and therefore nothing is truly objective because we understand and talk about the world through language. So this is a stronger argument because language is subjective in many ways. Words change meaning over time and have many definitions. Some languages in the world also don't have certain concepts. In some languages, certain colours don't exist, or there's no concept of left and right. So does this mean that objective things don't exist? I would argue no. For example, you could say the light is blue, or you could say the light is green. This is subjective, is it not? Blue and green are perceptions. These words are subjective, yes, but we can use specific language. You can say, the light's wavelength is 500 nanometers. Now this is not subjective at all, this is an objective measurement without any ambiguity. You could do the same with this. Today was hot, or today was warm. Or you could say, the max temperature today was 30 degrees Celsius. So many words are subjective, but others aren't. Science uses very specific terms to avoid ambiguity, and if there are any situations where the meaning isn't clear, then you can simply define what you mean. Did you hear that? Defining terms that you're using. You should try it sometime. The other problem is that postmodernists make objective claims all the time. When they say, philosophy is based on Western colonialism, is that objectively true or just your opinion? If it's your opinion, I don't care and I could ignore it. If it is objectively true, then you're again contradicting yourself. They completely contradict themselves all the time. Chapter 4. Knowledge. Here's the claim. Knowledge is not neutral. It serves dominant power structures such as patriarchy, colonialism, and capitalism.
We should admit, rather, that power produces knowledge. That power and knowledge directly imply one another.
Yet again, this is another contradiction. It seems not many people question these ideas. So knowledge serves Western colonialism. Do you know that? Isn't this knowledge? The problem is the way that this argument is stated isn't very clear. What is actually being argued is that what is considered knowledge is decided by the people in the West, and therefore there is a lot of gatekeeping, and it is a way of keeping power. But even if some knowledge has been controlled historically, this doesn't mean that knowledge itself is invalid, biased, or servant of oppression. This is where the postmodernist view starts to collapse in absurdity. If a scientist in Nigeria, Japan or India discovers a new antibiotic, do people in Europe reject it for not being Western? Of course not. If a woman in Pakistan discovers a new law of physics, does the patriarchy shut it down? No, good ideas are accepted globally because they work, not because of who said them. Chapter 5. Science is a narrative. The claim, science is not special, it's just another culturally biased narrative among many others.
Science has always been in conflict with narratives. It is now itself a kind of narrative. The grand narrative has lost its credibility. Science cannot legitimate itself.
This might be the most ridiculous thing I've seen said here. Science is simply, let's try to find the truth using evidence. We create explanations and test them in experiments. The explanations that best predict reality is accepted. Anything can be proven wrong with better evidence or explanations. Note how they don't mention any specific part of science. They can't use specifics because it will show their contradictions. Without science, we wouldn't have electricity, smartphones, planes, cars, trains, medicine. All modern technology is based on science. How did we create smartphones? They're a combination of microcircuitry, motherboards, processors, touchscreens, lithium batteries. They were all created using scientific principles. They create prototypes using an explanation of how things work and test it. The version that gives the best result is kept and incrementally improved. But apparently this is just a narrative and not true objectively. Don't Japan and China make a lot of new technology? How is science Western only? It's just a methodology to minimize error. I'm pretty sure postmodernists use smartphones, modern medicine, planes with jet engines, and more. So they are simultaneously believing that science works while saying it's just a narrative. You can criticize colonialism and Western-centric thought all you like, but this has nothing to do with the validity of philosophy and science. For just a narrative, it seems pretty consistent at creating new ideas, curing disease, and landing rovers on Mars. So that's all for the arguments against philosophy and science. I hope I've treated these arguments fairly. If I haven't, please let me know. The last thing I want to do is misrepresent arguments. Somehow these ideas have spread throughout Western universities, in areas like literature, art, sociology, and gender studies. Postmodernism is everywhere. There is no objective truth. If you remove standards and objectivity, it can have disastrous results for society. World War II wasn't caused by rationality, it was caused by irrationality and crisis. Philosophy and science are what led us to technological advancements, evidence-based justice systems, the presumption of innocence, freedom of speech, equal rights for women, and more. Before that, we had hundreds of years of suppression of free speech and religious freedom. I'm worried to see where society might go if we remove philosophy and science again. But that's all for this video. Let me know your thoughts, and I'll see you guys next time.